Stewart. So Stewart studied industrial design in Glasgow. He worked for Nike for 7 years in the global soccer unit. He ended up moving to the UK to kickstart the Umbro department, which is a Nike affiliate. So they did a lot of apparel and graphic design and footwear, equipment, branding, print, and exhibit design. And then luckily in 2011, luckily for us, he left the UK and came to Atlanta to be closer to family. And now he is an art director at CNN Digital, concentrating mainly on branding, digital brand strategy, and a few other things. So he also does freelance illustration and branding outside of those hours. So he's become a good friend of mine. He's a really great guy with an amazing accent, so I'm excited to listen to that. So maybe he'll do like a Braveheart speech at the end for us. That would be cool. So let's get a round of applause for Stewart.
There's a lot of people here. Thanks, Blake. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for asking me to come and talk here today. We don't have subtitles, I'm sorry. I'll be really honest, really straight off. I'm just like one person with one story, and really I don't necessarily have any more right to be up here telling it than anybody else. But I'm really appreciative to Blake for asking me to come. And talk to all you guys. Came to Atlanta about a year ago, and I've just really been blown away by the creative community here, the sense of togetherness, and just like the incredible work that gets done here. So it really is an honour to be up here talking to you. I was born in Scotland, just outside Glasgow, in a little village called KILBARCHAN. And like every small village, they've got their little quirks, they've got their little traditions. KILBARCHAN's no different. This is the church steeple, and legend goes that every year the statue of the Piper comes alive and leads a parade through the town. But it was a really nice place to grow up. There was a lot of space. We could get out on our bikes on, you know, the few sunny days that we had. To be honest, mostly I was inside drawing pictures. My dad was an engineer. He shot competition air pistol, and he had all these kind of books with all these beautiful, like, cutaway and exploded renderings of guns, engineering parts, cars, and I used to sit and copy these and make up my own versions. When I went to high school, I continued with my artistic endeavours, and somebody introduced me to this guy who has probably had the biggest influence on me from an artistic point of view, Andy Goldsworthy. He's a sculptor from the UK, works almost exclusively in natural materials, almost always outside, and he does incredible stuff like this. What really grabbed me was just the way that he takes a seemingly insignificant item like a leaf or a rock, and by repeating that, he can make it look really powerful. There's an incredible tension in his work, and for whatever reason, it just really spoke to me. So, as you would imagine, I tried to emulate a lot of that stuff. When Blake first called me to do this talk, the first thing that I did was get on the phone to my dad, ask him to go up into the attic and pull down all the wonderful work that I'd done in high school. So you can imagine my disappointment when crap like this showed up in my inbox. Not quite as good as I imagined it being. I think there's only 2 photographs in there that are actually in focus. So I guess it's kind of ironic me standing up here at Creative Mornings and showing you the worst stuff that I've ever done. But the point is that you can see the influence that particular artist had on my work. When it came time to leave high school, I applied to the Glasgow School of Art, which is a very prestigious art school. Not surprisingly, on the strength of stuff like this, I was rejected. So I went to my second and third choices, which were in Dundee and Edinburgh. They also had really good schools, and I was rejected for them as well. So I ended up studying industrial design at a local Glasgow college. It was a 3-year course. Didn't even get a degree out of it. And to be honest, it wasn't really for me. The engineering and the technical aspects to it just didn't really grab me. But what I did enjoy doing was doing all like the product renderings and visualizing my designs. This was back in the days just as the first Apple Macintosh was released. The college did have about 4 or 5 of those, but the graphic designers kept them all to themselves. So I had to do all of my renderings in Pantone markers and airbrush, and I also did a lot of hand technical illustrations like this, you know, sitting at a drawing table with a ruler and a set square and a fine liner. And I really enjoyed like getting into the detail of that. So when I left college, this was just after the last recession when the tech bubble burst. I was unemployed for about 6 months. Eventually I took a job working for an actuarial company who looked after people's pension schemes. And I did some desktop publishing for them. I designed brochures and flyers, and I did a whole lot of PowerPoints. They would give me stuff like this and ask me to make it look good on a PowerPoint slide, which is about as much fun as you can imagine. This presentation is purposefully minimal, I think, just as a reaction against that stuff. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years, but at a certain point, I decided that really wasn't what I was wanting to do for the rest of my life. The creative industry at that point in time in Glasgow, you know, wasn't really as alive and kicking as it is now. And sometimes you just have to take a little bit of a leap of faith. So I quit my job, packed a suitcase, and bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. Actually, I'll go back and just tell you this like funny story about. This was probably my proudest moment when I was at that actuarial company. I did 30,000 leaflets about public sector pensions. And just as a little bit of a warning that spell checker doesn't always save you, I got them all printed, they all came back, they all get sent out as that. So let that be a lesson to all of you. But as I say, I ended up in Amsterdam. It wasn't a completely random choice. I did know a couple of people there. I knew that there was some good companies out there. I knew it was a really multicultural environment, which was something that really excited me. And when I arrived there, 2 or 3 months later, I was working for Nike in their global soccer unit and doing work for some of the best athletes and some of the best teams in the world. This is some stuff that we did for the World Cup, for Brazil. We did graphics for Korea. That was one of my favourite, like real minimal ones. And we did the US kit as well. And it was a real thrill to, you know, see your work on the biggest stage in the world as far as soccer's concerned. Amsterdam was always has a close place in my heart, really. Some of my best experiences professionally were there. I'll tell you about my single best experience, which actually didn't happen at Nike. when I first arrived there, I just needed a job to pay the bills. And somewhat ironically, considering I'm working at CNN now, I took a job answering telephones for Time Warner Publishing. People would call me up with their subscription problems for Time Magazine and National Geographic, and I would attempt to sort them out. And something really interesting happened to me there, something that really shaped how I feel about work and how I feel about the value that you can give to people, and the difference you can make. People would call me up and complain that they hadn't received their magazine, or they wanted to change their dress, and I would try and do that for them. But something became apparent like after a few days there. Some people, probably about 1 or 2 calls out of every 10, I couldn't really ascertain what their problem was. They would ask me where they were calling. They would ask me about my accent and how come a Scotsman is working in Amsterdam and what's the weather like and all of that kind of weird stuff. And I couldn't understand it. Then after a couple of days, it hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. These people were calling me up because they were lonely. They didn't have anybody to talk to. And they'd found the number at the back of the magazine, and they'd called it up just to hear the sound of another person's voice, which was pretty amazing, really. And so that's what I did. When they called up, I talked to them, my proficiency numbers were in the toilet as far as the number of calls that I got to answer. My bosses certainly weren't pleased, but it really was amazing the difference that you can make to somebody's day just by talking to them, somebody's week, somebody's month even. My favourite day of work ever was when this old man from Amsterdam called me up. He was a World War II veteran. National Geographic had done this amazing anniversary issue on D-Day. And he was complaining that he'd been waiting for this for weeks and it hadn't shown up. So, not really trusting my computer skills with the MS-DOS program that we used, what I used to do was just go down into the storeroom and pick up a magazine and put it in an envelope and post it to them off personally. He was in Amsterdam, so I picked it up and I got on my bike and I cycled to his front door. And I delivered it personally to him. And just the look on his face when he realised that, somebody had just gone that extra 2%, it was absolutely priceless. And that's something that I've always tried to bear in mind ever since then, really. Going that extra 2%, that extra 3%, just to try and give a little bit extra can give you so much back and make, a much, much bigger difference. In Amsterdam, I also met my beautiful wife, Sarah. I met her at Nike. I met her in the copy room there. She maintains that she only had the courage to talk to me because she was high on the fumes of the spray mount. But I'm very glad that she did. Another great moment was the 2010 World Cup, and Nike had this Write the Future campaign. And I think when people ask me for my resume, that's what I'm going to give them, which is, so that is my design for Portugal on Cristiano Ronaldo as drawn by the Simpsons animator. So. That's pretty much how I felt about that. So fast forward to 2009, and we picked up with our then 3-month-old daughter and moved to Manchester. We went to kickstart the graphics department at Umbro, which is a soccer subsidiary of Nike. And I got to work on some amazing product there. This was the England shirt that we did. I collaborated with Peter Saville on this, which was an amazing opportunity, an amazing experience. Fantastic guy. I also worked with Paul Barnes from Commercial Type, if you know his type work. That was a huge honour as well. So then we came to Atlanta. We've got family here, so my wife got a job opportunity and I came out with a view to doing some freelance work. And pretty soon after I got here, I was doing some work for Coca-Cola. You may have seen these billboards around the city recently. So we worked on the branding strategy for this, the photographic strategy. The photographs were taken by an amazing photographer called Jason Nikito, and that was pretty cool. I'm at CNN Digital now, which is a really wonderful opportunity. It really feels like a place that's chock full of innovation, incredibly talented people. I'm not just saying that because some of them are here today. An interesting thing also happened to me when I came to Atlanta, which I guess is kind of like the bigger point of my talk today. I'd spent years working for Nike being a chameleon and doing graphics in all sorts of different styles. If I was doing 20 or 30 graphic t-shirts a season, they can't always look like they're coming from the same person. So I'd spent all this time trying to master all of these different styles, and I realised that when people started asking me for freelance illustrations, I didn't actually have a personal style. And it felt a little bit like a designer's identity crisis, I guess. I'd spent years doing stuff like this, typography stuff like this, various different illustration styles. And I didn't really have my own style. I started off doing illustration work that felt very on trend. It was full of textures and other effects, and it just didn't really feel right. It didn't look right either. So I really had a little bit of a hard time trying to define what I was as a creative, which was kind of interesting after having worked for the last 10 years. I set myself some personal projects. One that I did right off the start was I took Pink Floyd's album Dark Side of the Moon and did a poster for each of those tracks. I don't really know why I picked that album. I think lyrically, I guess, I just felt there was a lot of rich imagery on that. And I went through and I had a lot of false starts with it, a lot of failures and things that just didn't really feel right. But eventually something started to click, and I didn't really know what it was, but I pushed on it, and I kept going, and I kept iterating on it, and I kept just trying to push it and see what was actually there. So eventually, they came out looking like this, which kind of felt, it's not necessarily totally different to what anybody else was doing, but it really felt right for me. I loved the detail in it, I loved the symmetry and the repetition. And then it clicked and I realised where this was coming from. And the point that I'd been missing was that I was just trying to be somebody that wasn't me. And the thing that I was looking for had been inside all along, ever since I was a young kid. So I kept pushing on it. I did this poster as a present for my wife for our anniversary. I did some custom type work. And then I pushed on the Pink Floyd thing and did these illustrations for Belle and Sebastian songs. I tried to take what I'd done with the previous project and just really push it about as far as I could go. So there's a lot of symbolism in there about Glasgow. The building in the corners, that's the Glasgow School of Art, so I maybe haven't quite gotten over that yet. But I realised that what I was looking for was inside me all the time. This was one that I'd done for Pitchfork. This is one of the latest ones. But when I look back, I realise that this kind of stuff from Andy Goldsworthy, you can see where that's coming from. And this was obviously something lodged away in my subconscious. I hadn't thought about these pieces for, you know, a long time, but it was obviously still in there, and it meant something to me at the time, and all I had to really do was recognise that and pull it out and, you know, amplify it. You know, this kind of work, you know, you can see, you know, where the influence was coming from. You know, the technical drawings that I did at college that I really enjoyed, like losing myself in the details, you know, you can see where that like mono line weight style comes from. So I guess if there's a moral to the story or a bigger learning, would be that, you know, if you're looking for who you are creatively and what your style is, I guarantee you it's already there. You just have to, you look back at your culture, look at your history, look at the games that you played as a kid, you know, look at what your parents did for work, the town that you grew up in, the holidays that you went on, you know, and pull those out and amplify them. And that's what makes you uniquely you and different to everybody else. And that, I believe, is how you can find your own voice. Just look inside and pull out and amplify what's already there. Thank you very much. The footwear design, we did a little bit of footwear design when I was at Umbro. Ultimately, the process for that wasn't really any different to anything else that we designed at Nike. It was all based on innovation. It was all based on how can we benefit the athlete, you know. And that's where everything started. And that was the same for World Cup uniforms, footwear, equipment, you know, whatever it was we were doing. We would always start with the athlete, talk to them, find out what we'd done, how we could make it better, what worked, what didn't. And that's what we did. I mean, we worked on, it was performance footwear, if anything that I did. The lifestyle stuff is based in something a little bit different. There's a lot more of a cultural influence that comes in there. But the performance stuff is really just geared around making the best product that you can for the athlete. And the athlete, I guess, is anybody. It's not necessarily just elite players at the top level. You know, it's kids that are playing in the park as well. I mean, they're athletes just as much as anybody else is, I guess. That was actually a huge part of what we did. We would travel every season. We would travel as much as we could and go visit those cultures, whether it was in Brazil, Italy, Spain, here in the US. You would travel and you would talk to people and you would find out what makes them unique as opposed to fans, supporters from different countries. And it's amazing that you find, you know, these little insights, these little nuggets that give them something different to everybody else. And the trick, especially through colour and through graphic and through typography, you can pull those out and amplify them and give them something that the fans can really take a hold of. A good example would be the typography on the latest Brazil uniforms. You can see there's an influence from the graffiti that you see in Sao Paulo, you know, whereas the typography on the England kit is a little bit more austere, you know. So we would just try and pull those things out and amplify them and reflect that back to the consumer. And ultimately, what you end up is with a lineup which has a real consistency as far as innovation and overall aesthetic looks, but there's also a lot of individualities, you know, through colour, through graphic, through type, you know, that's how we approached it. Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, you know, like the Cocteau Twins. There's, you know, fortunately, there's a lot of Scottish bands. I remember making a mixtape for my wife during our early dating days that was just full of Scottish music, and it was pretty good. The biggest influence musically, to be honest, in my early days, I didn't touch on it in the presentation, I was really into heavy metal. I loved the artwork. This was in the days before Spotify. If you were lucky, you could find maybe like a 2-paragraph review in a weekly magazine. But there was something about going to the record store every week and judging the music that you buy purely based on the cover art and the names of the tracks and how cool the band looked on the back, you know. So like that whole like visual language of music has always been a huge influence. Probably more than I even realise. I wondered if somebody was going to ask that. Whether you like it or not, for me is really, it doesn't make any difference, you know. Yeah, it's a little bit challenging to look at. It comes down to, it comes down to personal taste, really. What I would say is that it completely broke the mold for those kind of branding projects, you know. And the one great thing that I would say, which I can't ever remember seeing before, was that mark and that branding was done years ago now, and people are still talking about it. And people that would never otherwise engage in a conversation about design or creativity are doing that, you know. You're seeing it in populist national newspapers in the UK. People are debating back and forth whether it's good or not, you know. And I think that's a huge win, you know. I think that's something that needs to happen more. The other great thing that they did was just the way that design language was implemented so consistently across venues, across signage, you know, marketing materials. I think they did an incredible job with that. But ultimately, it, you know, instigated a conversation. And I think as designers in a creative community, to have people that wouldn't otherwise engage in that conversation get involved, I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I just want to keep going and keep growing and keep developing and see where it takes me, really. I mean, when I started doing the personal work and the freelance work, I didn't really have a concept of what it was going to look like and how far I was going to go. It just kind of happened organically. And I guess, you know, the plan for that kind of stuff is to just keep pushing on that. And who knows, it might take a different turn. I think, like I mentioned, like the culture and the heritage that, you know, we have that influences our work, but that's a continuous thing, you know. So I'm here in Atlanta now and I'm soaking up a lot of new influences and meeting a lot of new people, and there's different things happening here that I haven't seen before. So, you know, who knows, you know, that will probably have an effect on the work, you know, as we go forward. I guess that's part of the fun, you know, just seeing what happens. Right.
Let's give another round of applause.
That was so awesome. Thank you. That's so good.